Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. Today's event is a Conflict Resolution Alliance presents Mediation Professionals in the Field. Today's topic is about Beyond Resolution, integrating therapy-informed mediation for lasting relationships with Sabra, Della, Lucia. And myself moderating. Today's topic is about traditional mediation focuses on resolving disputes, but what happens after the agreement is signed? So therapeutic mediation goes beyond resolution by blending facilitative, evaluative, and transformative mediation techniques with therapy-informed principles to support effective communication, relational repair, and long-term cooperation. This presentation will explore how this integrative approach helps maintain necessary post-mediation, equipping mediators, therapists, and professionals with tools to navigate conflict with empathy and effectiveness. I do want to thank all our wonderful collaborators across the islands who are co-sponsors for today's event, from Family Mediation Hawaii, Common Collective Therapeutics, LLC, Collective Solutions Hawaii, Conflict Resolution Alliance, the Hawaii State Judiciary, the Center for Alternative Dispute Resolution, at the Hawaii State Bar Association, ADR section, the Matsunaga Institute for Peace, in the local community mediation centers such as the Kauai Economic Opportunity Incorporated Mediation Program, the Kuakahi Mediation Center, Maui Mediation Services, the Mediation Center of the Pacific, and West Hawaii Mediation Center. But without further ado, I want to introduce our special guest today. Sabra is a professional mediator and licensed marriage and family therapist with a passion for conflict resolution and relational healing. She earned a grad certificate from the Matsunaga Institute for Peace, or the Sparkin Matsunaga Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution, before obtaining her Master's of Science in Counseling Psychology at Chaminade University in Honolulu. With experience as a mediator at the Mediation Center of the Pacific, she simultaneously built her group therapy practice, Common and Collective Therapeutics. She has since transitioned into private mediation, founding Collective Solutions Mediation and Consulting, where she coined the term therapeutic mediation, a model designed to support relational healing through structured conflict resolution. While therapeutic mediation integrates facilitative, evaluative, and transformative mediation approaches, it is a distinct process separate from therapy, focusing on guiding parties towards sustainable agreements while preserving those important relationships, which is something that we always love to talk about, the power of positive, healthy relationships here. So really excited about this opportunity to delve further and learn from you and from our community today. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our guest today. Thank you again.
Thank you, Jose. I'll just make one correction. My name's pronounced Sabra. You did great on the rest of it. And phonetically, it is Sabra. So just in case I see
So
anybody else.
sorry, Sabra, yes.
Don't be sorry. Thank you so much for having me. I am really excited to be able to share a little bit about the work that I've been doing and playing with. And I just want to thank Lisa Jacobs, who's my new mentor through the Conflict Resolution Alliance, for encouraging me and really actually challenging me to present today. So excited and nervous. So I just ask everybody to bear with me as I move through the presentation. Also hoping it can be a bit of a conversation. Just to keep myself organized, I believe Jose is gonna be fielding the questions in the chat, and then I'll be pausing to answer those questions periodically throughout, versus leaving it open for conversation over the course of the hour. So, okay. Yeah, so beyond resolution, we're going to be talking a little bit about how to put together a mediation that allows the relationships to be facilitated post-mediation. So we're really talking about folks that are in a mediation that will need to have some sort of relationship thereafter. For me, relationships are incredibly important. So this was really fun to think about how that came to be for myself. And I'm going to share a little bit about that in just a moment. But I did want to do an exercise because in therapeutic mediations, it's important to be incredibly mindful of our own emotions and what it is that we're experiencing, as well as the other parties, as mediators in particular. So I wanted to do just a brief mindfulness exercise with us as a group. So I invite everybody to settle in. I'm going to ask you 5 questions. If you want to close your eyes, I give you just an opportunity to think a little bit deeper about it. But I want to know, I want you to know, why are you here in this space today? What drew you to the title of this presentation? Who informed you of this event? And how do you know this person? Who are they in your life? What community are you engaged with? And when did you become part of this community? And sitting with some of these answers for yourself, taking a moment to have gratitude for the peoples and communities, the people that have led you here, the community that surrounds you. And I invite you to have a bit of curiosity for the next hour or so about what's being shared, how you might implement it as a mediator, or if you're not a mediator, how could it be of use in your everyday life? Because we're really talking about important, impactful relationships. Just ask you to take a deep breath in through the nose and a slow exhale through your mouth. Maybe one more breath in through the nose and out through the mouth. And perhaps just setting a quick intention for what awareness you can bring to today's session. To make sure that everybody's time is incredibly valuable. So setting an intention for this space. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so relationships, as I mentioned earlier, are really important for me personally. And obviously, I'm incredibly interested in them as a family therapist. I'm from a family of 10, and my partner's from a family of 9. So we really see the relationships that surround us as our lifeblood. We often laugh at how large our social circles are because of this, and it takes a lot of time out of our lives to nurture our relationships to have the vitality and the robustness of our lives. So we joke around about moving to a remote place where we would have a bit of a social break. And then we quickly realized that we wouldn't really know what to do with that social break because we're surrounded by so many amazing people, and that's how we really choose to spend our time. So for me, relationships have always been very vital, and learning how to navigate them coming from a large family or large family systems is not always easy. These are some of the important people that I have been in relationship with that have really helped me to guide this work specifically. So of course I have so many mentors and influences over the course of my life, but I collected these folks because they're specific to my mediation learning and process and how I've gotten here. So I just want to take a moment to thank them so much for their leadership. Of course, some of you might know that 2 of them are no longer with us, but one in particular, Malachi or Mo Mamalonga, he was my first mentor as a professional here in Hawaii. So I wanted to share a little bit about what I learned from him that really started my journey as a mediator. Okay. Oh, sorry, we can go back one. Okay, so when I moved to Hawaii, I really had very little understanding of the social landscape. I did not do my work to understand the diverse population or really, really much at all, actually. So I came here kind of eyes wide shut. And I fell into a job as actually, I forget my title, but I was working at Adult Friends for Youth, and um, we did group therapy with at-risk youth, specifically with youth gangs in the public housing, as well as their families. So the youth were anywhere from 12 to like 25, so young adults as well. While the core of my work was providing group therapy at the time, what Mo taught me was the significance of building relationships, not only in the therapeutic rapport, but relationally to be able to manage conflict. As somebody new to Hawaii and a very different demographic than the folks I was working with, it was his guidance that allowed me to be successful in this area. And with his guidance, we were able to build community support, and I really moved into my first exposure, what I would say now, although we didn't call it this at the time, into therapeutic mediations. When we were mediating amongst opposing gang members, these gang members were riddled with the historical implication of the warring public housing or warring gangs. So it was quite intense, as you might imagine. I think as intense as it was, people oftentimes would ask me, what was the most worrisome part? Was it that these young yet very seasoned gang members were going to become violent, or how could you bring them together? They're going to harm each other and you'll get caught in the crossfires, and all of these different stereotypes really that people shared with me. But actually bringing them together in the same room, in the same space, was amazing. Of course, it required food. We always had food available, so we could be eating and keeping ourselves busy. But what I learned from Mo is that if the relationships of the parties were strong, the respect would be in place for a safe and real experience of conflict resolution. It wasn't really how much they hated one another, but how much they could trust us as the mediators to listen. So as you can imagine, this took a lot of work, a lot of curation. So we would meet with each side to understand the unique pain and experiences that fueled the conflict that we would be navigating. We would meet with the families to understand how far back this conflict has gone and what fears the families might have about these young men coming together. Young men and women, actually. We had a number of female gangs as well. And then we would have to really identify the leaders of the warring gangs, which typically we knew because we worked with them very intimately. But we would have to prepare those leaders with what the ramifications of an agreement would be. It wouldn't make sense to come together and have an agreement if those leaders weren't able to manage that agreement for the rest of the group, for the gang. And sometimes these gangs were, small, 10 individuals, but oftentimes they were quite large. We're talking like 30 to 40 kids they'd be recruiting. So again, that age range fluctuated. But the most important thing was to empower the leaders at the table to be able to express themselves and giving them tools and strategies to communicate effectively, to be heard, make sure that they felt heard, which was really rare for many of these folks to experience, that somebody was actually going to listen to what some of the conflicts were, and to understand that their word and their words have a lot of meaning and that they matter. So the mediation preparation could take a lot of time. It could take weeks, in fact, and it could be set off course very quickly, as quick as a brief negative interaction or a social media post or some hostile environment that was created at the school or something like that. Because ultimately, although they were in opposing gangs, they were in a lot of shared community surroundings. But it works, and it works time and time again. And it worked to create understanding amongst the parties, to increase safety, demonstrate respect, and in some cases, friendships would grow. In one case in particular, when we started with two leaders from each gang, they ended up being really close, really great friends because they had to keep coming together to navigate some of the things that were coming up amongst the larger gang. So they used it as a meeting place to manage themselves and facilitate dialogue. And the best outcomes, peace would occur overall. So a flare up or activity that would reignite the groups, we would be able to re-engage with the leaders, and they would always start adding. So more and more people actually wanted to be part of the mediation because it was seen as like a really valuable experience to be there and talk with the other side and learn. And yeah, we had to kind of cap it because the more people you have in mediation, the harder it gets. But I think at most we would end up with like 4 or 5 leaders on each side, which was phenomenal. But we would be building relationships, building trust, and building rapport. None of this could have taken place, nor would there have been success with the size of these community gangs without emphasizing the relationships that needed to extend beyond the mediation. So here I'm asking, what are the examples of relationships that you've had to mediate? So we're thinking about family, colleagues, partnership, and self. Do you see value in mediation amongst these people in your life in order to have ongoing relationships or contact? Okay. In my attempt to operationalize the process of therapeutic mediation to be able to share with you folks today, I kind of broke it down into 5 core tenets. So I'm going to go over those briefly as I can. The first one, let's see, maybe slide 5, Jose? Oh, no, one more back.
I don't have the numbers in front of me.
Oh, okay. Two more back.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, that one's perfect. Great. Okay. So relational preservation, again, this isn't operationalizing a therapeutic mediation. So I'm just going to go through some of the things that are really important to keep into consideration, but identifying the commonalities of the parties. I learned this a lot in being a volunteer mediator for the past 5 years at Mediation Center of the Pacific, in which I would watch some of the older mediators really take time in the mediation to get to know a little bit about each party or bring them together and asking questions about their kids, for example, if it's a domestic dispute. Super helpful. It breaks down the barrier right away. So identifying the commonalities of the parties that are showing up for the mediation. Echoing the importance of ongoing relationship health. So we're assuming in a therapeutic mediation, this relationship has to be ongoing, even if you may not want it to be a co-parenting situation, for example. Making sure that the parties are really considering the importance of the health of the relationship post-mediation so that they can find more cooperation within the mediation. That is actually the strongest tool that we have, is consideration of the relationship post-mediation. And then lastly here is the opportunity to collaborate. So offering an invitation to revisit issues. What this means is, okay, I don't know if I can live with this. So for example, if we're talking about a co-parenting mediation, well, that parent never shows up on time, so I don't think I can agree to meeting them at 7. Okay, that might be true. That might be your experience. But if we are able to make an agreement today, we can come back and see if that's going to work for you. We can see if that person was able to demonstrate the agreement that they agreed upon ultimately, and then come back to the mediation. So it gives people a lot of motivation to come to an agreement because they get to sort of try it out. And then, the hope is that they'll come back and revisit it if it's not working. Emotional intelligence. This one's really important, as you can imagine. So not everybody's appropriate for a therapeutic mediation, because the emotional intelligence really needs to be there. It encourages self-awareness. So how am I showing up in the session as a participant? High need for accountability in that I kind of need to know in the problem, what have I contributed? And so that's something that I ask people to be aware of rather than you, like, oh, okay, sure, yeah. But also, what has been your level of accountability for the issue that we're discussing, which takes a bit of emotional maturity and cognitive and emotional cohesion. I'm going to pinpoint that for later because I'm going to do an exercise with you folks to demonstrate what I mean by that and to give you an example of what I might do with the parties in session. Co-regulation between parties. This is a tricky one, and maybe I saw some therapists in the room, so that might be an understandable term for you. But for the non-therapist, co-regulation between parties. I'll give you an example. I had a couple who were working on co-parenting, and one of the parties was getting very upset, and the other party took that as this person stonewalling them. Look, this is what they always do. But what I knew, because I had had an individual breakout session with that person, is that person was doing their best possible work to not explode. They were not stonewalling their partner, which is understandable that that was the experience the partner was referencing. They were just trying to hold it together. And so when I could share that insight with the other party, we could kind of co-regulate and bring into the room like, hey, everybody's stressed, everybody's really doing their best, let's stop and take a breath together. And so as a mediator, that's a really valuable tool because sometimes we're picking up on the energies of the parties. And so we can, as I did at the beginning of this session, like, let's all take a breath together to calm ourselves down. Okay. The hybrid mediation approach, it's a really fluid transition as mediation evolves from facilitative into evaluative into transformative. Actually, the whole thing's transformative, hopefully. I just gave some notes here to those of you who are not familiar with the different styles of mediation, but I am going to go into them a little more thoroughly later. So we'll come back to that. But the mediator does need to be equipped to fluidly transition between those three things. Narrative reframing, again, this might be a term that's more available to therapists, but I'll explain them so you can understand what this might look like in the mediation. Shifting away from an adversarial mindset because we're asking the participants to build new pathways for cooperation. So this person has always done that, and I want to make sure that, you know, my child gets to play baseball and not basketball. Okay, that's an understandable desire. But if it's adversarial, well, he loves baseball and that's the only reason he wants him to play baseball. I want him to play basketball. We can talk about how to find a common ground versus that being adversarial about one parent or the other and refocus it back on the child. We're not looking for truth. So those mediators in the room, we kind of prep folks with this, right? We're not looking to see what is the truth of this situation because there are different truths for all parties. But I am very adamant that parties are able to take perspective on what they're hearing from the other party. So not trying to correct them or get to the bottom of who's right or wrong. Just be able to hear what the other person's experience is. And then once you hear it, being able to find acceptance that there's an alternative perspective or experience. It doesn't have to be your perspective or experience, but it's the other person's perspective or experience and making sure they can hear that. Being heard versus being right, that's a little bit more of like a skill building that I might do with them. The parties, that is. To give an example, if there are multiple folks in the party, like I've done siblings, adult siblings who are preparing a household for aging parents and trying to make some really hard decisions about care or finances or things like that. Clearly, these people will need to remain in communication and relationship. They're siblings and they're caring for their aging parent. But hey, I've been changing mom's diapers for 5 years and nobody's been here. Well, another sibling said, I've been here. I've changed diapers before too. Yeah, both are right, but we don't need to know who's changed the most diapers. We need to hear that this person feels they've changed 50 diapers. They're overwhelmed, right? Getting to the bottom of what they're trying to say. They're feeling overwhelmed. It's been a long time. We need to find a different solution. We don't need to know who changed how many diapers, for example. So sometimes we have to stop and build those skills into the mediation in order to move forward. And then the last one is long-term conflict resilience. So for me, the therapeutic mediation offers the opportunity to have ongoing mediations, ongoing conflict resilience, because you are trusting that you've built the skills to do so by coming back to me in a session or not being able to do it on your own, which would be, of course, the best option. But that starts with equipping parties with realistic expectations of what we're doing in the mediation and what they might need to carry outside of the mediation. So similar to the example of the gang members, we had to tell them, hey, okay, we're all agreeing upon this, but you guys are just two leaders amongst a gang of 30. So have realistic expectations of the other side. Something will pop off. It's not if. Something will happen. There will be something said or a little, body check or something like that in the school in which we'll have to address then. The expectation is not that everybody will be perfect moving forward. If we can accept that, then we can accept that we can come back together and renegotiate or address whatever occurred. Which is why openness to returning to the process is so incredibly important. Oftentimes people think that if we have to return to mediation, we did something wrong. It's not working. Somebody did something specifically to harm the initial agreement. But that's not necessarily true. So asking them to be open to that. Objective communication, again, this is a lot of skill building for the parties. Being able to communicate something like, my experience was that you didn't care to show up to the baseball games is very different than you don't care about our child. So it's using communication that is an observation of the experience to be able to work through it as a group versus blaming or name calling. So things like I statements are other good examples. Timing is significant. I ask a lot of folks to consider the timing, not only of a return mediation, but when you are going to bring up conflict with one another in session or at a different time later together, making sure that you're aware of the timing. So if you're doing a pickup for a child after school, that's not the time to be trusting your conflict resiliency. Set a meeting with the other party that you have an ongoing relationship with. Provide a framework for that meeting. Hey, we're going to meet at the coffee shop. We're going to end it in 1 hour. Don't let it go forever because that's bound for arguments. So kind of sharing with the parties that for long-term conflict resilience, timing is incredibly important and asking them to be considerate of that or mindful of that rather. And then reassessment and new agreements as a normal part of the process. What I'm referring to there is a lot of the most common example I can refer to is parenting plans and custody. So when folks are very eager, if there's a very young child or an infant, both parents are really eager to have as much time as they can in that really acute bonding time frame. However, that might not be super appropriate. Let's say that baby's breastfeeding. Baby will likely need to spend more time with the parent that they're breastfeeding with, of course. And so letting parties know we can reassess at a certain point in time what would be appropriate as that time comes up. Which is where you might flip into more of an evaluative approach, right? So as a therapist, I'm happy to describe to people what might be more age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for an agreement versus not. Not that they have to go with that. I'm not necessarily requiring anything like that, but to give folks an understanding and to ask them to take perspective on the larger situation and not just their position. Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. So this is the activity I wanted to go through with you folks. I'm curious to know how many people have heard of the emotional and cognitive coherence, but I guess I'll just wait and ask that later. But as an exercise of building emotional maturity, as you know, parties are coming to the table with high emotions, especially if these are impactful relationships that must continue. Very high emotions, oftentimes very raw. But they're fueled with the story in which that person has developed or understood or is continuing to tell themselves. It's not to say that story is not true for that person. It's very true, as are the emotions that are being fueled by that story. However, the stories or narratives, as we call them in the therapeutic world, about a conflict that we hold on to are not always helpful. We think that having that story is protecting us, but it's not. It's actually oftentimes standing in the way of movement. So we want to invite the participants to understand how that story might be fueling the emotions so we can pause on the thought, check in with the emotions, and move forward with what's most appropriate. When we ask ourselves to understand consciously what fear that story might be driving, and check in with those thoughts or that story, we can reevaluate the emotions. And ultimately, we're looking for a more balanced perspective. So this skill, again, in the therapeutic realm, would be called the skill of observing the observer or observing self. So I'm going to ask you folks again, inviting you to kind of sit back, get comfy in your chair. For me, it's helpful just to kind of close my eyes and manage some of the stimuli so I can really think through the questions. But I want you to consider a conflict that you've experienced. Maybe you experienced it as a mediator. Maybe it's a current conflict you have going on in your life. Maybe it's a conflict that you've seen in a family or a colleague situation. And I just want you to pay attention to the thoughts that you have about that conflict or challenge. I'm going to ask you, do you have a story about that conflict? A story that might feel very true to you, that you tell yourself about that conflict. I'm going to ask you just kind of like quickly to notice the emotions that are experienced when you consider the story. Taking a pause, taking a breath. Again, I'll invite you to do a deep inhale through the nose. And a slow exhale through the mouth. Engaging the parasympathetic nervous system. And notice if you can find a little more coherence. Okay, yeah, I really thought that maybe this person was harming me on purpose, or I really thought that this person just simply doesn't care about my finances. But maybe that's not true. Maybe that person is just wrapped up in the concern about their own finances. Maybe my story is wrong. And if I could think that maybe this person isn't trying to harm me. Now I'm just using a random example, right? But maybe if this person isn't trying to harm me, I don't need to be so upset. My emotions are there. I can feel them. I can honor them. But let me create a little more coherence because ultimately I want to be able to move forward and I want to understand what's needed. And if I'm fueled with raw emotions that are attached to this story, as real as that might feel for me, if I can create coherence, I can more effectively identify what is needed for us to move forward. So when the experiencing network comes online, this is how some neuroscientists will describe it. When the experiencing network comes online, the thinking network can pause. I got that quote from a really phenomenal podcast, which I can share later. With what we are experiencing, we can really identify what's needed. Okay, so hopefully that activity is useful for you. I would say most of us could use this in our daily lives. I'll give you a very simple example because I'm looking at it out my window right now. I'm in Kaimuki traffic. Wow, this person just cut me off. They don't even care about anybody else on the road. I can't believe they do that. Okay, that's my story, that they don't care about anybody else on the road. What if this person is actually late to pick up their kid, is dealing with a crazy co-parent, and is doing their absolute best to get there because that was an agreement they made in a really hard mediation? Okay, well, if a little bit of that might be true, I can find a little more coherence. Nobody's trying to cut me off. It happened. I can calm down. What is it that I need to move forward? Maybe I need to take a breath. Okay, next slide. All right, so I'm gonna pause here for questions, and I think what I'm really curious about from the audience, and Jose, maybe you can help field the questions, but I want to know what value you see in this exercise that we just did, exercises like this within the mediation, and would you feel comfortable as a mediator engaging in these exercises within the mediation and asking your clients to kind of pause on the content and the conflict and like take a moment, sit back, take a breath, and move through an exercise like this? And then any other questions that you folks might have at this point.
Thank you so much for going through the method and the steps that you go through. I deeply appreciated the insights and also just providing us that background as to the large families you and your partner come from and how I always say we all started getting trained in conflict management early on in our lives before we even knew we wanted to go into this field. It's kind of as though life just chose it for us. And so I'm glad that you've been able to kind of pick up those skill sets along the way. One question that I saw the beautiful photos that you have in your and I wasn't sure if those were just stock photos for like presentation purposes or like websites, or those are actually like the setting where you work. And so my question is more on the logistical, like, are you doing these in person? Are you doing them online? If you're doing them in person, I love the format of not having a table because traditionally with mediations, we have a table separating us. So yeah, any further insights you can provide on those logistical things? Because I know that kind of can change the environment too, that folks are coming together. Because there is a bit of a protection when it comes to having a table for folks.
Yeah, thank you for asking. I am like a space fanatic. First of all, if I could just live and be outside 100% of the time, I would. Um, but I have a studio in Kaimuki and I'm here right now. It's just like a big open studio. So I have my therapy couch and then I'm actually positioned on a table here. So when we do individual breakouts, I ask people to go grab a cup of coffee or do their thing. But the space is intentionally very big, very open, very airy, lots of windows and blank and clean at the same time. And so I love to do mediations here, and I really trust. We'll get into my pre-mediation process in a moment, but I love to be able to read the room as clients enter to make a determination. Okay, are we feeling table vibes or are we feeling couch vibes? And it's totally dependent. So I had a mediation that I did, one of my first ones. They were amazing, long-term friends turned business partners, needed to work out some kinks and needed a space to do that. They didn't know if they needed therapy or mediation, which is oftentimes the referrals I get. And so we kind of talk about what would be the best option. Um, they felt like couch people, they were good friends. It was informal, but oftentimes I'm getting co-parents and they don't want to be on a couch. They've been on a couch for years. It has not been successful and that's why they're here. So we go table and I prepare, I give them notes and water and some snacks and things like that to lighten it a little bit. So it's still breezy, but yeah, that's kind of how I go. I do Zoom because a lot of folks are coming from neighbor islands. Not my favorite. I'm not a fan, but I can. So yeah, those are some of my
Thank you so
wishes.
much. A few comments and questions from our audience. We have a coherence reminds me of DBT skills, that two things can be true at the same time.
Mhm.
I will say, when you talked about coherence, I thought about shifting our perspective. That's one of the
Mhm.
things I like to talk about. And I think the example about the car is definitely that. But one question from our audience: would you say that most issues that arise in mediation have to do with mind reading or assuming ill intent from the other party?
I wouldn't say that's where most issues come from, but I think within the mediation, when there's a lot of stuckness and which we're not really able to move to the next thing, that can be evident. It sort of depends on the history of the relationship. Of course, I would say mind reading is more reflective of a co-parenting, domestic dispute, whereas what was the other one?
Um, so mind reading or assuming ill intent.
Oh, assuming ill intent. Yeah, I mean that definitely comes up, but that's where I really stop and ask people to start taking perspective. I'm going to share a little bit more about that later, but um, I tend to get people who are a little more highly motivated to make agreements and have a strong relationship, even if it's not, not no longer a romantic relationship or things like that. So I think folks are generally pretty good at not assuming ill intent, but of course it can come up. Yeah.
Thank you. Um, I wanted to reflect a little bit upon sharing a little bit about gang leaders and the dynamics of that. That was I found that to be very insightful, and I just wonder if so you mentioned 4 to 5 on a side, not 4 to 5 total. So you're looking at like either 8 to 10 people that you're trying to find I'm assuming this is a co-mediation, not you juggling 10 people at the same time. But even with that, that's a lot, I imagine. I mean, I think most folks might be used to maybe one party and their lawyer, or maybe a little extra person here or there. So any, I guess, advice or tips of the
Yeah.
trade?
Again, this comes from my family dynamic as well. There's clear leaders. And even if there are multiple leaders, there tends to still be a clear leader or somebody who is level headed enough to where folks are going to defer. For me, it's my oldest sibling, which is oftentimes the case. But so they would really trust. I think when the mediations would get big, it was really folks wanting to demonstrate leadership, and we could give them the opportunity to do that in this really constructive way. Because as you can imagine, in a gang situation, you can be trying to garner leadership in an incredibly unhealthy way. That is the makeup of the gang. So it would typically be more like 2 to 3 on each side. Mo was always my co-mediator. Those of you who know Mo, because many people do, he is, I think I mentioned he's since passed, but he was a gang member and it shows. Whereas I'm like 5'1", Holly, like so yes, it very much was he was the physical sort of presence in that space. And I don't know how that would have worked without him, which is why I want to pay tribute to him, of course. But yeah.
No, thank you. Thank you. And I appreciated that slide of your mentors and it was good to see some faces and I'll share I mean David Chandler, also one of my wonderful mentors, got me through the same program that we went through.
Ah.
So yeah, more to talk at another level, but we do have some questions from our audience. What are some possible ways to manage party preconditions to participate in mediation?
Yeah, actually, if I can defer that question, my next slide, I'm going to briefly go through the process. Process one will take me the longest because I do ask that parties fill out a questionnaire, and the questions are very intentional and very specific to get them ready for this type of mediation. So I'll defer that for slide next.
You want me to show it now?
Yeah, sure,
Okay.
can. Yeah, so I think this is like my most important part of the process because it requires us to really prime the participants to make considerations and moves them away from this adversarial or positioning that folks can come into the mediation with, understandably so. Um,
And you meant pre-mediation, right? Not meditation.
oh,
Just it's okay. Autocorrect always does that. It's quite
it
okay.
does.
It's
Yeah.
okay. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yes, pre-mediation, not
Yes.
meditation. Um, But this actually allows the mediator to create cohesion in the agenda as well, which I think is super helpful. Not jumping all over from issue to issue, but like how can we have cohesion in the agenda based on what both parties are saying separately? And I'm asking participants not to look for weaknesses in their party's argument or asks, but actually strengths in the similarities. So this can be, these questions again are intentional to that. So the first question, what do you see as the central issue? So I'm asking the participant to focus on themselves. So this is a questionnaire that they fill out. So they take the time to do that on their own. But I'm asking them to get to the initial meat of the issues, and asking them to consider an agenda to organize themselves. But really what I'm finding is important is their empowerment to be ready to come into the session. Because they're ultimately the expert on the issue, right? I'm not as the mediator. Even when I'm jumping into evaluative, I'm not the expert. This is their life. They know the details best. What are the intentions for the mediation, and what are your hopes? That's really important to me. I want to create hopefulness so I can combat the disbelief of this process being effective for them, which is sometimes the case, right? If you're getting a court mandated mediation, particularly a domestic dispute, they're already sort of in disbelief that this is going to do anything for them, but we have to come here because the judge said. I want you to think about, okay, well, that's fine, but what could you be hopeful about? How do you think the other party might be experiencing this conflict? So this is like a little seed planting to prime them for taking perspective. What do you think they might be experiencing? Right? Not what they think, not what they're doing, but what do you think their experience of this conflict might be? So it's asking them to have compassion for the other party, even though I'm not telling them that directly in the question. What feelings or concerns are you holding as you come into the mediation? So I'm already asking them to build a little bit of emotional intelligence in awareness, so they can consider like, wow, I'm realizing I'm feeling really angry. Maybe I should kind of tone that down a bit before I go into this space. And then what areas do you feel open to exploring or adjusting in order to find a resolution that works for both parties? As most of us mediators know, sometimes people come to the mediation with an expectation. I'm not moving on these things. I'm not going to adjust here. And I'm already asking them, like before they even come in for the meeting, what are you willing to adjust? Because you will be adjusting. We are compromising. That's going to happen. Okay. Yeah, let's see, next slide. So I'm going to go through these quickly because I am conscious of time. So actually, probably really quickly, facilitative mediation for those of you who don't know, but really for therapeutic mediation, we're just asking to drive the flow of the conversation. But when I say holding autonomy of parties is top priority, it's they are the parties. I am not driving the agenda. They've given me the agenda, so I'm aware of it, but they are autonomously driving the mediation. The next one is evaluative. Thank you, Jose. This again comes in because I am a family therapist. I might be able to provide some expertise or experience as to what has worked for other families, what might be developmentally appropriate, and what folks might consider. I'm not going to be able to tell them what a judge might decide because first of all, I'm not an attorney, but second of all, I don't know. But I can provide some expertise, some experience in my field, and I will do that when I think it's helpful. And then transformative mediation, that's really happening throughout the course of the mediation. We're starting that already with the reflective questioning that I just said is my pre-mediation process. But the transformative approach is we're resourcing, we're collaborating, we're getting ideas down. There are no bad ideas. We're letting go of positions and concrete outcomes that people might feel are important and massaging those out a bit. And we're really looking at the process of the mediation as a part of the relationship building, not just goal orientation. Like I said earlier, we can come back and revisit things. So to me, like the transformative piece is incredibly important. And I'll just say it's really important for me to have fun. I don't really like to do things unless I'm having fun. Anybody that knows me personally kind of knows that. You'll know right away if I'm not having fun, I'm out of there. So the transformative approach really allows you to have fun. And we do a lot of laughing, which seems weird for a mediation, but a lot of laughter because we don't have to take everything super seriously. And then lastly, I've mentioned it several times, so just revisiting it one more time, I love the opportunity for a follow-up. Folks are much more inclined to make an agreement they believe they can play out and come back. It also allows the ability to quell any disqualifying beliefs about the other party's capacity to hold to the agreement. Like, okay, you don't think they can do it? Well, let's try it out. Let's see how it goes. We can find different alternatives if needed. Because I do rely so much on this as part of my structure, I do set fees that are affordable so people are not deterred from using the follow-up mediations because of costs. If I don't hear from folks, no new news is good news. I'm assuming that all is well. Yeah. Thanks. Next slide. Um, mediator competencies. This is like if you're interested in engaging in therapeutic mediation, you do not need to be a therapist. It is not therapy. We are not processing, but there are therapists that are really primed with the communication styles, become equipped with a skill set in compassion and non-biased, non-judgmental communication. It's very much a part of our training as therapists. So obviously that's going to be helpful. And then of course, professional training in mediation. A lot of therapists have asked me like, hey, like you're doing mediations now. That's really cool. I think I might start doing that too. I tell them, okay, start at MCP, start volunteering, go through their trainings. They're phenomenal. Of course, Jose and I both did the Spark and Matsunaga graduate certificate. I highly recommend that if that's available as well. We need to have skills in emotional regulation. We need to be able to manage ourselves. Many therapists, and I'll just speak to therapists because I am one, have told me like, wow, I don't even want to do couples therapy. I don't know how you can be mediating. Because therapists tend to be highly sensitive people and it is intense. Sometimes I'm leaving in mediation like, whoa, I'm buzzing. So needing to know how to regulate ourselves, not only in the mediation, but thereafter. Otherwise, this work is going to be incredibly taxing. Trauma-informed practices. Most of us know what that is now. We need to know if there is trauma that has taken place, how to be sensitive to that within the mediation. There's a lot to be said about that, but I'll just leave it at that. It's important to mention and there's a lot to it, but we won't cover it today. And then being able to adapt to the mediation styles dynamically so that it can continue to be transformative and fun, because that's also part of the relationship thereafter, right? Beyond the mediation, they have to continue to communicate. And so we want to make sure that there's a lightheartedness to it. And then I think I have one more slide. Yeah,
Yes.
ideal client. I talked briefly about that. These are people who are motivated for mediation, are going to be continuing in relationship, hopefully have some insight and most likely some previous therapy because we're not doing therapy in the session. Those are the ideal clients. And then very, very last slide, I just want to share my contact information. If you do have questions about referrals, I always do a screening call that's anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes. That's free. I do it with each party. And the screening is to really make sure that they're primed in, and this is an appropriate mediation style for the participants because it's very clear if it's not. And so I want to make sure that I'm doing my due diligence as a provider to either send them in the therapy route if that's what I'm hearing is needed, or make sure that this is an appropriate mediation style for them. Because again, it's really not for everybody. So those are our contacts, and you're welcome to reach out anytime with any questions, send referrals, whatever you like.
Thank you so much. Just maybe a couple additional questions. One actually from one of your mentors who's here today. Thank you for a fascinating presentation. I'm always interested in power dynamics and how to stay neutral when you have unequal power between the parties. How does therapeutic mediation address power imbalances in mediation?
Good question. I guess my initial response to that is perspective taking. So you're asking, is there anything about what this person is saying that could be true? So that can sometimes neutralize the power imbalance. Of course, in the screening, my hope would be that I would be identifying any huge power imbalances. Let's say, for example, DV, that would probably not be appropriate for a therapeutic mediation, even if we could stay separate. Other things that I have done in practice is asking somebody to step out and kind of working with that person who maybe seems to be trying to exert power, or in some cases, working with the person who seems to be cowering to whatever power imbalance had been taking place, and trying to understand for myself what is going on here and how can I neutralize it, what would make everybody comfortable. This isn't always appropriate, but kind of my bravest thing that I do is I call it into action right there. It feels like there's a power imbalance here, and I want to understand what's going on because that's going to be preventative of us coming to an equitable agreement. And I'll just ask the parties to explain it to me and break it down, and then ask them to really be accountable for how that's showing up, which is why it's so important to have people with high insight. People with low insight are not going to know what I'm talking about and or not going to be willing to admit that that's what's going on. And so even if I'm pointing it out or observing it, they're not going to be prepared for that conversation. So if they're somewhere in the middle, I can have that conversation with them in the individual breakout session.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Some additional comments from the audience. The post-mediation follow-up offering is a great idea, something that I think is unique for therapeutic mediation practice. Also, the use of the private sessions to address power imbalances somebody had suggested. But
that was a comment or question?
Oh, no, no, well, there was no question mark, so I think it was just
okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, no, I can definitely see through the screening. I mean, one of the things I always think about is like with imbalances, just rarely does this happen, but sometimes a superior, like a boss, and then someone reports to them, like, is that really the best place mediation? I mean, if they're exploring that, that's wonderful, as opposed to other options which folks tend to normally explore. But yeah, just understanding that within the mediation session, we're trying to create an even playing field where it doesn't matter that you can basically, have that extended power. So yeah, no, thank you so much for today's session. Thank you for giving an insight into this amazing your practice and the work you're doing. I think your studio looks amazing. I look forward to visiting one day. Just hopefully not for a mediation, just to stop by to say hello.
Yes.
And I think as it is, you talked about, briefly how clean, how organized it is. I think that also sets the tone for the parties that are coming in. Because I do know sometimes where although we may be organized in the mediation, we may be a little more scattered in our private spaces and our papers are everywhere. And so people notice that. And so I think it's important to just kind of set the tone from the moment that folks come in, and you provide snacks. That's amazing. I've always heard water. I never heard snacks. So that's that's also
I
intriguing.
have all the options: water, coffee, tea, sparkling water. Yeah, it's really
Wow.
a homey feel. I think for me that's just super important because I'm here
Yeah.
all day too, right? So I
Yeah,
want to make sure
true.
it's very comfortable. Um, yeah, but thanks for noticing that. I don't know that, I'm curious with mediations how many people think about what the space is going to be like in their selection criteria of a mediator. Um, Sometimes my space is weaponized in the couples therapy session. A partner might say, well, yeah, they want me to make the house look like this and it can't look like this. I'm like, yeah, well, this is an office. My house doesn't look like this either. So yeah, it's funny the differences.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for everything. Greatly appreciate you, and I look forward to our ongoing collaborations. And thank you everyone who joined us today as well. We'll be look forward to more conversations. Thanks again.
Thanks, Jose.